one of the people that reminds us about our goodness each and every day is the director and founder of the D.B. Reinhardt Institute for Ethics and Leadership. I can't remember the last time I gave you this man's full title, but you all know who I'm talking about. Rick Kite. I know who can write about Aristotle and trout fishing in the same article and make it seem like it all fits together. We became friends when he was first hired at Viterbo, and I was on the committee to interview him. And I thought, I hope we can interview him, and I hope he becomes my friend. Well, by golly, it happened. Now, Rick also started writing for the La Crosse Tribune. And he was writing, and many of you read his articles in La Crosse Tribune on ethics and leadership. Many companies use his articles for ethics training. Now, what happens? A friend of his at the Tribune, an editor, said, we would like to offer this to our whole Lee enterprise. Rick Kite's articles on ethics and leadership are now read in 75 different papers across the country. And now he's doing podcasts. Soon to be a Netflix series. Ethics, leadership, and trout. Rick Kite.
And so the reason Aristotle and trout fishing go together is that Aristotle gave us the name for the mayfly, which the Greek name is ephemerella, the genus mayfly ephemerella, from which we get the term ephemeral, which means not lasting very long, because after they live for a year as a nymph and they transform into a mayfly, they only live for 24 hours. Similar to the butterfly, which has a very short life after. So I'm tying this into this morning's talk. And if you don't remember anything else from today, you can remember this, that it doesn't take very long to accomplish a great deal. And the older we get, the more we realize that our lives are pretty ephemeral. That little that we do is really lasting. We like to talk about that, but it's the relationships that we build that are vitally important. And it's so inspiring to be part of this message today and hear messages from people like Jervy Wyndham, who I've known for a long time, but I take so many notes on Jervy every time I hear him speak, because he reminds me that, yeah, you pay attention to the person who's right in front of you. I get the great pleasure today of introducing you to three people who are authors, who've been sharing or are about to share the lessons that they've learned about relationships and about how we strengthen our lives and our organizations by developing those relationships. We have Bernie Osborne, who works in manufacturing for Badger. He is written a new book that is forthcoming from Fulcrum Press. You heard a little bit about the partnership with Viterbo University and Fulcrum Press doing a new series on servant leadership. Bernie's book is going to be the first one in that series that's going to come out this fall. So we're going to ask Bernie to tell us about his book. We've got Carolyn Colleen, who wrote a book about 5 years ago called Fierce, that tells about the life lessons she's learned that she wants to share with others. And then she has a new book that's just coming out that she will talk about. And then Caitlin Wilson, who's working on a book right now, which book will be featured in this new series with Fulcrum that is on the inward journeys of servant leaders. And so I've asked each of them to share a little bit about themselves, about the book that they're working on or have written, and then we're going to talk a little bit about the writing process. So Bernie, could you lead us off? Just tell us a little bit about yourself and about the book that you've been working on for the past couple of years.
Yeah, sure. Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here. I'd just like to first say thank you to Rick and Tom and everyone who made this possible. It's amazing. 5 years ago, I came to my first servant leadership conference up here, and Peter out here in the audience took me under his wing that day, sat down, made sure I knew that I had a friend up here. And just going through the conference, that solidified my decision to come and join the master's program, and now here I am 5 years later talking to you. It's just amazing. It's just amazing. So that's a little bit about myself. Servant leadership from the middle. So before I begin talking about my book, I want to take a quick poll of the audience. How many people, with show of hands, how many people have had a bad boss? Oh my. Well, that was exactly my story when I entered into the world of adult work. And I'm sure you, like me, thought to yourself, well, if I ever got in a leadership position, I will never treat somebody that way or do what they did. So eventually I got into a leadership position, and I realized I don't know what I'm doing. And the leadership around me at that time was very command control, and I knew deep inside that wasn't right. That wasn't me. That wasn't who I was. So for years and years and years, I struggled to do the best I could, listen to my inner voice and try and figure out what I can do and how does my style of leadership fit into what was going on around me. And it wasn't until I was in one of my undergrad classes where we had the same cohort for about 2 years, and then things changed, and I went to this class, and everyone in the class was new to everyone. And we had a certain professor in that class, and with that first day, instead of just doing your regular introductions, the questions that he asked and the way that he responded to the students, he started to build community. And I didn't really catch on that first week, but then the second week when we went back, it's like he did the same thing. And by the end of that second class, it was like a small community had developed in that classroom. And we all felt comfortable with each other, and if anyone remembers doing class projects with other students, it was always a dread, but the way this professor put us together and built this community, it was really a joy to be in that class. And after the end of that second class, I stayed after and I asked him, I said, what did you do and how did you do it? And he said, well, I was practicing servant leadership. And that's where my leadership, where I started to get interested in servant leadership and learn more about it. So with the book, this is what I wanted to do for my final project in the colloquium. I was like, well, I was kind of reflecting on my past work experience and what I've learned over the years and the conversations that I've had with other leaders that have impressed me and everything that I learned through the master's program in servant leadership. I was like, well, maybe I can try and write a book and put these thoughts down and try and help other new and emerging leaders like myself, kind of give them some advice, give them some guidance, share some of this wisdom that I've learned over the years that I wish I would have had when I started out, and maybe we can get it into the hands of other people. We could, help some other people as well, but let's start that conversation. And one other thing, we all know, I apologize for my ancient graphics, but we all know the hierarchy pyramid, right? Who has responsibility from the top down and duties. But I thought about this, and it's kind of like what Jeff was saying about the 7,000. In my organization, you got some people at the top, but then you come down, you have 4 supervisors, you have 7 leads, and you have 60 line employees. And so servant leadership from the middle is very important, because if your culture down here is not good, it's going to affect everything from the organization, the culture, to your customers. and everyday life. And work can be better, work can be fun, and that's kind of what I hope to intend to do with the book Servant Leadership from the Middle. So, thank you.
Thank you, Bernie. And Carolyn, do you want to tell us, so you wrote a book about 5 years ago, Fierce, and then you're working on another one, but tell us a little bit about yourself, like the journey you've had, and a little bit about both of these books.
Well, I'm Carolyn Colleen. I'm what you call a townie. So I am from La Crosse. I grew up in La Crosse. I graduated from Central High School in 1995. Yep, just in case anybody's wondering. People are thinking, oh, did I go to school with her? Anyway, so, I went to Viterbo University and I started at UWL, completed my undergrad, transferred to Viterbo, and then my master's at Viterbo as well, and then on to my PhD in organizational leadership at the Chicago School of Professional Psychology, close to being done. And I'm also the founder of Fierce Foundation, which is a foundation for generational change, creating generational self-sufficiency. And what that means is we have a beautiful servant leadership community here. So many servant leaders. And I wouldn't be where I am today if it weren't for the people in this community. So I came from very hard upbringing, and I suffered a lot of abuse from a very young age. And that defined how I viewed the world. And through that, and navigating through that, I was able to crawl my way out of both mental, physical, despair. And now today, through Fierce Foundation, I'm able to help break that and create generational self-sufficiency, collaborating with the nonprofits in our area that serve an immediate need, such as housing, food, those immediate survival needs, and taking those that have that ember and just need a little fire. And what I'm doing is, with that, creating generational self-sufficiency. And Fierce, my first book, came from, it's a Fierce Transforming from Adversity 5 minutes at a time. And the reason it's 5 minutes at a time is because we may all have heard of 1 day at a time, right? For me, when I was standing in line at the Salvation Army, fearful of losing my life, fearful of where my next meal would come from, and fearful of protecting my child, 1 day was too much. Along with the flashbacks of things that never should have happened, starting at age 4, from both men and women. Realizing that the fear of the unknown, which we talked a little bit about earlier, fear is very debilitating and immobilizing, paralyzing. Getting through 1 day at a time was just too much. And quite honestly, I didn't want to, and I just wanted to leave this world. But I realized that I could do it 5 minutes. 5 minutes. I could concentrate on taking that emotion that held and kind of held me in one place, and use that emotion as fuel for me to choose something that served me compared to something that self-sabotaged me. And I did that, stacking those 5 minutes throughout the day to get to 1 day. And so that's where my first book, Fierce, Transforming Your Life from Adversity 5 minutes at a time, came from. And now the next book that's coming out, I've co-authored in several books, and this next book comes out in October, which is Academic Entrepreneurialism. And it looks at the theory of, as an entrepreneur, that entrepreneurial story of trying, falling on your face over and over and over again, and getting back up, along with that academic portion of the schooling that I've gone through, and many others have as well, and what creates an entrepreneur. And that comes out in October. That's published by Springer, so it'll be in business schools. And I'm a co-author on that book. And what else? Oh, and then I also have a private school. So I started a private school that's rooted in Socratic method, meaning what might we look like if we have children who at a very young age have the opportunity, whether they are wherever their background, to be able to ask a question, seek to understand, stand for what they believe in, and also be loved and respected. And so how might we challenge the way that we teach our future leaders and also encourage them in entrepreneurialism, because it takes a village to raise a child.
Great. Thank you, Carolyn. We're going to hear more about your story and the books that you're working on in a few minutes here. Caitlin, you are the Director of Corporate Communications at Marine Credit Union, and you've been working on a book for the past year. So tell us a little bit more about your journey and then about this book that you're working on right now.
Yeah, thank you, Rick. So I am also a townie. I'm also a townie. I went to Aquinas, and there are a lot of people in this room that also taught me and helped shape me. My parents are up there somewhere. Hey. So I'm very privileged to serve the people of Marine Credit Union and the story and the heart of the credit union, which is also a townie in and of itself as an organization. Its roots trace back as far as the 1930s, when it started as La Crosse Teachers Credit Union back in the day. So very privileged to serve, and we have a group of people here today from Marine. If we're speaking a little bit about how we got connected to the servant leadership journey to begin with, I will say Priscilla right there, I think it was in 2019 at our last in-person conference here, that it was after the conference, and she looked at me and she said, well, if you've been thinking at all about doing the program, you better do it now, because Tom's not going to be in this for very much longer. So thank you, Priscilla. Thank you. The working title of my book is The Inward Journey of Servant Leaders, and it is a collection of stories and insights from servant leaders who've walked a diverse range of fields and lives. And most of them, actually many of them, are in this room. One of them is sitting alongside me. And so it is a calling and a privilege and a gift to have spent time in sacred listening with these leaders, and to be able to share their stories with you. The inward journey, and this phrase and concept of a journey, I think many of us in this room are intimately familiar with our own inward journeys. This was something that I studied and focused on as my colloquium in the Masters of Servant Leadership program. Similar to Bernie, this journey started out in the program. And what I found, and what I was privileged to be receiving when I was in conversation and listening with these leaders, is not the external accolades and accomplishments that they were sharing with me, but it was the intimate pieces of their inner lives. The transformations and evolution in their consciousness, their beliefs of themselves, of others, and their role in this world and place and time that we're in together. That's what kept coming out. And so as I'm starting this journey, and early on in this journey of book writing, that will be the intention behind the book.
Great. Thank you, Caitlin. Well, I've got a few questions, and I'm going to get them started. We're going to just do more of an informal conversation here as I toss some questions out, and then I'm going to open it up to all of you for some questions in our remaining time. But I want to ask you first, as Sam mentioned this morning, 75% of people say they have a book in them. Not many books actually get out. But you're all doing it, and so what really prompted you to actually do it, and then what were the obstacles that you had to overcome to actually get involved in the process of writing and the determination to make that step? So tell us a little bit about that.
Oh, for me. Oh, check. Oh. Battery died. Check. All right, here we go. So for me, it was to write the book. I wanted, first and foremost, to help others. That's the whole sole purpose of the book. I had no idea the book was going to actually turn into a book. I had no idea I was going to be a published author. So everything is a blessing after that. I think the hardest challenge for me would be going from writing inside the academy to writing outside the academy. When I was going through the editing process, that's where I thought I was doing a great job of writing outside the academy. You know, when you're writing inside the academy, you're writing papers to prove, you know, to your professors that you know what you're talking about. You know, you're using citations to, you know, back up what you're thinking. And when you're writing outside the academy, your job is not to write about you, it's about to provide value for the reader. And that going from one extreme to the other, that was the biggest challenge for me. You know, every time I ended up getting writer's block, what set me back on course was, who am I writing this for and why am I writing it? And as soon as I got in that mindset, it was like, okay, now I'm back on path and I can continue writing. So that was kind of my biggest challenge.
Yeah, Carolyn.
Yeah, so I would say, you know, the reason that I wrote my book, as humans, we're continually evolving. There's a saying, either you're growing or you're dying. And I wanted to be able to make sense of all the things that happened in my short lifetime. And I also wanted to be able to release that one person from that mental jail. And, you know, I remember the first time I took a class with Mr. Thibodeau, I'm continually evolving and growing. And every day, at the end of the day, I think, you know, what have I done right? What have I done wrong? And then pray and hope for the best the next day. And I remember my first class with Mr. Thibodeau, and he spoke to me. And it was, wow, I'm here, and this makes sense. It feels good. I haven't lost hope in humanity. And it started to make more sense, and I realized that if I could share my story and make sense of it, because sometimes, you know, when you write a book, you're also, particularly if it's trauma and you're working through trauma, you heal yourself too. So each time that I'm able to share, I'm able to heal. And so through that process, it was very healing. And I'd say the biggest challenge in writing was truly that self-doubt. Like, who do you think you are? Constant. Who's going to read it? What is all this? Oh, well, you know, I'm part of this Me Too movement and what, you know, all these things that go on in your mind that get in your way. And I would say that's the biggest thing. And that is writer's block itself, I would feel. But it was for that one person I could help. And fast forward today, it's been an honor to be able to grow a team that can help many.
So the reason for me that I wrote the book is I asked Rick if he needed help with anything. I was finishing up the program, and I just was wondering where I could serve and help as I was finishing up. And so that was the reason. And so this was a project that Rick and Sam Shinta were envisioning doing a collection of interviews with leaders. And
I kind of tricked you, though. You asked me if I needed help with anything, and actually, I ended up giving you something to do that I wasn't working on at all. So
thank you. And I would say the biggest challenge so far for me, as I mentioned, I'm much earlier along in the writing process as Carolyn and Bernie are. And so my interviews are complete, and I would say, and I'm beginning the writing, I would say the most difficult part so far for me has been not wanting to interview every single person that I come in contact with. Limiting the amount of people, I just think volumes could be written on probably each and every one of us in our stories. So that was the most difficult part.
Well, I want to ask each of you what you've learned in the process too, because one of the most important things I've discovered in writing is it's very important not to know where I'm going to end up, because I rarely end up where I think I'm going to, right? Like writing is not just a process of telling, it's also a process of discovery. And so I wanted to ask each of you, what are some of the really significant things you've learned in the process of writing?
Check. Okay, I'm back on. For me, it's kind of a juxtaposition, because I learned that your writing will affect your thinking just as much as your thinking affects your writing, if that makes any sense. When people ask me, some people ask me, well, how long did it take you to write the book? And I'll say, well, 4 months. And they look at me like, well, God, that can't be very good. He only took 4 months. But, I had 2 years to think about writing the book. And when I started my colloquium, I told my wife, I said, hey, I'm going to come home from work. I'm going to shower. We're going to eat dinner. And then when 7 o'clock hits, I'm going in the room and I'm staying in there for the rest of the night. And I did that pretty much every night for 4 months. I tallied up the hours, and it came up to like 458 hours, which comes up to like 12 full-time 40-hour weeks that I spent in those 4 months. So it's, I learned something about myself, that I work better under a deadline, which I never believed that was possible, but it came out to be. So those are the kind of things, everyone's going to learn something different when you set out on a project like that, and it's unique and it's challenging and it's definitely worth it.
Yeah, Carolyn, what have you learned?
I would say the biggest learning is that I'm worthy. I think it's something that everyone needs to be able to hear. And through the process, it has opened up so many doors. And being able to be in the space of learning, intentionally growing, and then being able to serve. And through being able to serve, I've been able to open up so many more doors, but then also evolve and reflect back and see, oh, that's where I was. Locking yourself in the room 4 months, and now here's the book, and just continually looking back and reflecting from what was to what is to what could be, and leaning into what could be. That's and then within also looking back of all the people who have seen me. That's the biggest thing, is being able to see another human, look them in that eyes, honor them, and it changes their life. And so that, I guess I'd say the biggest thing is I'm worthy.
Caitlin.
One thing that I learned is how powerful the unifying thread is between past, present, and future. So something each and every person that I spoke to shared with me is how those threads have intersected in their lives. And for each one of us to identify the foundations that we stand on, which don't define us, how that translates into the present moment that each of us were born into. We're all together in this. Every single one of us has been born into this point in humanity's history, and what that means, and what we can contribute to our future. And so over and over again, to me, those threads of past, present, and future just ring true. And I know this is something that Rick talks about a lot as well. So that's the biggest learning for me.
Right, thank you. I would like to open it up for questions. I'm going to ask them one more question here, and then we're going to open it up for any of you that might have questions. Just like, we know that there's a number of people that are thinking about doing this. So do you have any advice for people who might be thinking about becoming first-time authors? What would you have to say to folks in the audience who are thinking maybe they have a book in them that they'd like to take this step of actually writing it?
Yeah, I say if you got the idea, go for it. Go for it. You have your story. Remember, you gotta provide value. Provide value, and there's value in every one of your experiences and your life history that you can share that can help another. So go at it with that intent to how can you help? How can you serve somebody else? That's probably about the best advice I can give.
I'd like to echo what you just shared, is we each have stories. We're humans. Like since the beginning of time, we share stories, and that's how we learn and how we grow. And each of us have a story. And your story might be that one story that helps release another person from whatever it is that's holding them back. And I say, if you hesitate about writing your book, or who am I, or all those things that we think every single day, why we beat ourselves up, I don't know. But remember, just like earlier, talking about the fear, the only difference between a hero and a coward is the action that follows the fear, that emotion, right? So how everyone has emotion, everybody has fear, everybody gets angry, everybody has doubt. But when you take that deep breath and you remember, what is that action that comes after the fear? And that's what determines how you might be able to help that next person struggling, that next person who might need a path or a forge a way. So I would say, write the book, find Mr., where did he go? There he is. Yes, right there. See him?
Yeah, Sam's right back there.
Carolyn and Bernie both said it eloquently. So just to underscore, follow the call.
Okay, so do any of you have questions for authors here about the writing process or about the books that they're working on? Questions? Yeah, right here.
So I have a question for Bernie, and maybe you'll make me wait for the book. But so you write about management from the middle, or servant leadership from the middle. So that was something that I've actually been kind of thinking a lot about this whole time, because a lot of us have worked for fear-based managers who are up here, and we're trying to be a more servant leader here. And then, so do you have any recommendations for being a good servant leader in the middle and kind of playing that balance and or even mentoring and leading up?
Yeah, well, here we go. Technology. So without giving too much of the book away, from leading from the middle, I think the best thing you can do is just keep trying to innovate ways to introduce servant leadership into your organization. Like I said, there was times where the organization that I work for was very command control, and I was able to begin a lunch and learn ethics program that I termed an ethics program, but it was really servant leadership. I didn't tell them that. So you be innovative and find ways to inject servant leadership in, and try and get more people. Don't take it on yourself. That's the worst thing you can do. Try and get somebody else who like mindset, think alike. And what was the second question? Oh, how to inject it up. That's hard. Very hard, very hard. It's a constant struggle. And let me tell you this. So when you're trying to introduce servant leadership into an organization, any organization, you're always going to find roadblocks. And especially with servant leadership, we all hear that people think it's soft or it's religious, and all these stigmas that go around with it. But I was working for this amazing manager, and him and I saw eye to eye, and it was great. And he recently retired, and our last conversation before he left the organization was, when you started talking about servant leadership, I was scared. And when he told me that, I was like, wow, wait, I've never heard that term associated with servant leadership before. And that kind of woke me up. It's like, wow, maybe that fear, being scared of servant leadership, goes up higher and higher and higher because people don't want to lose control. They don't know what it is. What's this thing that's going to come take over my organization? So the best thing you can do to inject it up, in my opinion, is lead from the middle and just lead by example, and little by little just start adding more and more and more. You're welcome.
Any other questions for our authors? I'm trying to look around here. Yes, Beth, go ahead.
Hi, this is for anybody. How do you face that blank page? How do you start?
So how do you face the blank page? How do you start?
So I have heard because that's a problem. So I've talked and asked a lot about that, and what has worked for me is to just start writing anything. Like sometimes I can speak for myself. I get too preoccupied on what's coming out on the paper being like perfect or what I want to say. Sometimes I'm just writing almost like gibberish. And I find if I combine that with freeing my mind of any expectation of what I'm putting down on paper to be perfect or what I, want to say or planned, I just put pen to paper. And then the other part of it for me has been just creating the physical environment where over and over my body, just readies itself for, I have my chair in the corner at my time, I light the candle, and it becomes a routine. So combining the physical environment with, trying to shed my expectations, that has worked so far.
I would say, first, just declare it. Own it and say, hey, I'm going to write a book. Because it takes a village to raise a human, right? So tell people about it. Next thing you know, people are like, oh, hey, how's that book going? And then, engage your community, engage your people, and get buy-in. It took me 9 months from start to finish. At 4 in the morning, I had my family, my 3 kids working full-time at Gunderson Health System, and I got it. It should have been done in 6 months, but then there's that little piece of me that said, oh, yeah, you can't do it. Who's going to read it? All those things would have taken me 6. However, declare it. That's what I would say the first step is. And then there's all kinds of little hacks. Like you have this beautiful cell phone. You can talk into it, and there's something called Google Docs that has like a little microphone, and it transcribes for you. And you can pace, and talk and transcribe it. And, some people say they're not writers. Well, I'm not necessarily a writer. I'm an author. I type it out. I speak it out. I sometimes I'll be at a stop sign in the car, and all of a sudden something comes up, and I push that little record button on my cell phone, and I speak it in. So there's so many different ways that you can get around, belaboring in front of the computer all the time. Get a little, innovative.
Something that helped me, there's a book out there, it's an older book, I believe it was early 1900s. It's called How to Read a Book. And it's a pretty thick book on how to read a book. And believe it or not, from reading how to read a book, it kind of provided the path for writing a book, if that kind of makes any sense. So that's a good thing. The second thing, I started out, I wrote the chapters, and your chapters of your book are kind of like the roadmap for the reader. So that kind of gives you a path. But the interesting thing is, when I wrote my chapter titles, I didn't follow any of it. It just kind of took on its own path there. And if you end up staring at a blank page, or you get a couple sentences in and you don't know what to do next, get up, take a walk, or take a shower. I guarantee you ideas will pop into your head when you do that.
And one thing I want to share too is when you declare it, make sure that you continue to share with those people that are your big cheerleaders, right? Because on the day that I was about to publish my book, I got scared. And I thought, forget it, I'm going to throw in the towel, I'm not going to do this. And I called up my mentors, and I said, hey, I don't think I'm going to do this. And they said, if you don't do this, I'm going to come down there and do it for you. Because they are there, your cheerleaders, the people believe in you. And that's, and they're right here in the room. They're right here. Engage them. Allow people to stand up for you.
Yes, go ahead.
Are there writing groups in the lacrosse area?
Are there writing groups? Yeah, who said yes? Right, tell us about the writing group.
Well, I haven't joined yet. There are several writing groups in the lacrosse area, and
Okay. So there are multiple writing groups in the La Crosse area. And I think most communities have them, just a matter of finding them. Yeah. And I love, so many of your suggestions, like I find like going out and taking a walk is for me the most creative thing, but then you find yourself like thinking of ideas and then how do you write them down? So if you have your phone and you can speak into it, right, because it's hard to, you're walking around, it's hard to be writing and walking at the same time, especially if you're chewing gum. And then, like this idea of writing out a path where you're going to go that you end up not following. Because you only start on a journey if you have a destination, but you don't necessarily have to go to that destination. But if you don't have the destination, you don't start, right? So you just have to have a plan of where you're going so you get started. So I think that's great advice too. This question over here, Lori Jane.
Caitlin, you kind of touched on, there's so many people to interview and you have to limit yourself. Did you all experience that? Because there's so many wonderful things about servant leadership and the work that you're doing, so many thoughts, so many ideas. How did you find, or how were you able to kind of condense and focus in on something more specific for your book?
So I'm just going to repeat that. So Laura Jane's asking, like, how did you narrow the scope? There's so much that you could write about, and I would imagine as you get started, you find more and more that you could indefinitely expand. How do you focus the topic?
Well, I would say just really directly how I was able to narrow the list of people that I interviewed is they were recommendations from Rick and Tom, and so at some point that I just knew that I couldn't interview, I couldn't do any more than that. Maybe that's another book. But so it was just with their help focusing that down.
Yeah, I completely agree. Definitely have people that support you. And what I share with people who are publishing their book is, take that portion what is it that you really want to get out of this first book? Just like Caitlin says, there's more books. So what is it that you really want to get out of this book? Who is it that you want to speak to? And like for me, it was me 20 years ago in order to give hope to that person. And then what's the one takeaway that you want for them? So then, therefore, it gets clear and concise. And so then, therefore, I have a few stories. Now, I could go on for of so many different things that went on, but I really need to focus on what was it that I want them to walk away with. So then, who engage coaches, engage mentors. 2, make sure that you're share and bring up those stories that you want people to be able to get the point, but they might not have to go you might not have to go into complete detail in order to earn the right as the expert in that particular topic that you're sharing, such as your story, because you're the only expert in your life. And then, what do you want them to walk away with? What is it that you want people to learn? Is it a memoir, or is there something that you want them to learn from the experience, to walk away with? And then, anything, other stories, other things that come up, like Dr. Kite was saying, that come up as you're walking, or add those to your stories. It doesn't mean that it has to be in this book. It can be in the next book. It can be after I published my book, I became an international speaker, and then I published and was in other books. And then you can take those stories and share them there. Or you can be in podcasts. You can be on YouTube videos. You can be on, I was just on CBS, NBC, all these different things where you're collecting these stories. You're like, oh yeah, I remember that. Or, oh, this is relevant, and keep note of them, but they might not necessarily need to be in that book, but they might be in a series, or you may co-author with others' books. And so just getting right back to who's that one person that you want to serve, and what do you want them to walk away with? And then as those stories just continually come up, save those, and they may come up and be useful in other areas. It's like for collaborating in other spaces.
Yeah, for me, it's remember your purpose and provide value. When you're writing, it's okay to just go ahead and write whatever comes to your mind, because the next day when you come back and you reread that, when you have a fresh pair of eyes, you'll know immediately if this is something that you want to keep or something you want to maybe push off to the side for later, or just discard it all together. You know, you'll develop your eye for what you're reading and where you're going as you're developing your books. So that just kind of comes naturally with the process.
So finally, you all mentioned like how much time this took. This is a huge investment. It's a huge investment of your attention. Bernie, you basically added another full-time job for 4 months, and this is costly in some ways. Is this something that's energy draining or energy giving? What would you say?
Oh, definitely energy giving. Energy giving. It's like I said earlier. You know, your writing influences your thinking, and your thinking influences your writing. So, you know, even if your work doesn't get published, you come away a better, stronger thinker, because you really begin to learn more about yourself. And when you're trying to teach somebody else something or help them, you start reflecting that back on yourself. And it's like, wow, you know, do I do this? You know, I'm trying to tell somebody else to do this. Do I really do it? That was a couple times I got that awakening while I was writing. It's like, wow, you know, I guess I have some work to do here. So you really end up, you know, becoming a better person going through this process.
Carolyn, very quickly, energy giving, energy draining?
Giving.
Giving. Kaylin?
Same.
Great. Let's thank our authors.